Hi, everybody. My name is Jared Milrad. I'm the founder of Movie Karma with a nonprofit organization that created our podcast here called Rewriting Hollywood, which is focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and representation, as well as social impact in Hollywood, really looking at the power of story to affect social change and inspire others around the world. And today we were really excited to have a special guest joining us to talk about a new documentary that I had a chance to check out. The doc is called Prophets of Change. It's narrated by Oscar winners J.K. Simmons and Forrest Whitaker, comedian Sarah Silverman, singer Perry Farrell, and Billy Zane. It's really an incredible documentary that you should check out. It's filmed over a period of 6 years, and it follows the lives of several artists and activists from both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Muslims and Jews, Palestinians and Israelis, gay and straight, each of them who summoned the courage, love, and determination to break the cycle of fear, distrust, and resentment to come together through the power of music. And today's guest is David Sarfati, who's joining us. He's the producer of Prophets of Change, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his journey as well as the journey with this incredible film. So, David, thanks so much for being on the show. It's great to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing this film with me. So let's dive in. Tell us a little bit, if you would, David. We'd like to start with your own journey. I saw that you were born in France, raised in Israel. You're a producer, you're a writer. You've worked with some top media agencies and talent in Israel and in the US. Tell us a little bit about just your journey before we get to the film and how you found your way to be a producer and a writer in the industry.
Sure, of course. Well, I think that I always joke that I grew up in Israel and I was too French for Israelis. And whenever I would go back, we would go back all the time. I kind of grew up in between Israel and France. And in France, I was too Israeli. And so I always kind of felt in between. And then I moved here and now my mom tells me I'm so American. So I always had this, feeling of in between. And growing up, I love TV more than anything. I would watch, and I still do, basically everything that would come out. So it was always my dream to work in TV. Or I loved reading the newspaper, like the weirdest child probably that loves reading the newspaper. And as well, everybody is kind of subscribed to the newspaper. It's not like here, so it's less weird. But in hindsight, it's probably still very weird that a 7-year-old is really excited to read the newspaper.
Yeah.
So I would check out the headlines and was really excited of learning, the new things for the day. And you had like an actuality class where you had to bring like a headline of the week that you liked or were interested by. And I always loved that. So I think loving TV and loving the news, and that kind of led me to, and being curious, I guess, about things and life, kind of led me to eventually going to film school, and from that journey on to working in different types of TV and film and marketing and media and writing about TV and film and then making them, and that's when and how I got to doing this documentary. We started working on it about 6 years ago. And I started working on it because one of my best friends here, Asaf, who's directing the film, who directed it, he basically started working on it, and he was asking me a lot of questions, what I thought, what about this, what about that. And he was just kind of like consulting, but just as friends. And at some point, he was just, I was such a part I felt so involved that he was like, you should join and officially, like, let's do this together. So that's
really coa. Yeah, and I wanted to dive into that. So you guys connected. You, as you said, with the director Asaf, and you as I understand, as you mentioned, this was a long-term, 6-year project. So what were some of those early conversations like, and what did you first learn about the project that intrigued you or made you think this sounds really interesting, I want to be a part of it?
I think that so when we started working on the documentary, I had just like moved to LA, and it was right when Trump was elected. Like him or hate him, he started such a civil movement in the US, made people so aware of politics here in a way that I don't think they were before.
Right.
And you saw people going out, taking the streets, and you saw artists being more vocal than ever. And that was very inspiring. I saw people learning more about the House and the Senate and flipping seats and all of that. It was so weird to see such an engagement in like out of probably despair, but still in such a positive way of we're going to take to the streets, we're going to be active about it. And at the same time, and as well, we were in such a deadlock, and we're still in a deadlock, politically speaking. And it felt like there isn't a real movement around it. It just feels like everyone's kind of jaded and didn't really know what to do. So when this project came about, and it was like in that period of time, it just felt like I can shine a light on good people doing good things. What's better than that?
Yeah,
And so
1,000%. Yeah, I love that, because it's like, we all do at times feel, I'm sure, cynical and jaded and overwhelmed with the political space, especially in the Trump era, but really in the last, 20, 30 years, at least in the US, where there's been so much division, of course, polarization, partisanship at extreme highs. So it's really interesting that you sort of felt that. Was it also, did you connect to the project in part because of your kind of multinational identities and kind of having this sort of international background, that did you feel some of the tensions around identity that we see in the film around the Israeli-Palestinian?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's how I relate to a lot of these artists. I think, and there's a moment in the movie when one of them, Milrad, she talks about her identity and how she defines herself. I'm Israeli and Palestinian. And then at the end, she makes a joke, which I loved. And she says, I got an email from a fan saying, what about your Bulgarian heritage? And it's, you can't win.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it's so hard, even when you don't feel like you're representing a people. It's so hard to find your place, and it's so hard to define who you are and where you come from and what that means and how you carry it over as a legacy. I thought it's super interesting to see how they not only struggle with it, but then how do they carry their voice forward then after.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I want to dive into all the pieces around identity, because as you mentioned, some of the artists just have some great, sort of thoughts in the film around just their struggles around existing. I mean, in a sense, and just being, I think one of the Palestinian rappers and artists talked about, that his life is political. Like every kind of breath he takes is political, just because of he's Palestinian, so he has to be essentially a political person. Talk a little bit about that, if you would, because I think that's something that is maybe lost on us as Americans sometimes, unless we do have a Palestinian American or come from one of these backgrounds, or feel like we're straddled between multiple identities. But I think for maybe many of us, I know for myself, like that might feel like a foreign concept, that we're torn between these literally different countries, different ethnicities, different cultures, and it's sort of caught in the middle of the political situation.
Yeah, I think that if you're a minority anywhere, you can relate to what he's saying, because by definition, you have to fight for whether it's rights or recognition or just attention. And that's basically what he's saying in a way. I can relate to it as a Jew, I can relate to it as a gay man, I can relate to it on so many levels. And I think that that's at the core of who he is. It's political. I think we also see it then with Khalas and Orphanland. There are two bands, Israeli and Palestinian bands that performed together and went on a tour in Europe. And at some point, the lead of Khalas, Abed, he says something like, I want people to ask me about my music. And everybody's saying like, oh, this is so amazing, you're two bands. And that's the other part of that, the other end of that scale, right? Like he is political by nature. He is political because of who he is. And at the same time, he also just wants to make music,
right,
and be known for the music, not for the act of coming together. But both are as important in so many ways, right? Like we wouldn't be talking about you if the music wasn't great either. So I think there's the scale there of like, we want to make great music and we want to be activists as well, because we have to be, because it's who we are. And I think in that sense, just having your voice heard is so important, even if you don't intend it to be important. And I think that's kind of what I love about the way they go about it. There's no like felt of we're so important in what we're doing.
Yeah, there's a great humility to so many of these artists, but there's also a sense that they have an important story to tell or a voice that they want to share. Let's back up a little bit for folks too, because
Yeah.
I know you were telling me before we met today that you like you were telling me a little about how this journey started with director and sort of how you started it. Almost it sounded like a little bit haphazardly or kind of coincidentally, like the stories of these artists
Yeah.
started to emerge. Like, tell us a little bit about that journey. Like, how did like this documentary start to take shape?
There was a show that was planned to take place in the sea zone in Israel that was supposed to be kind of a Coachella for young Palestinians and Israelis, like Palestinian and Israeli youth, basically, that was set to take place in 2017. And that show was supposed to have a lot of different artists in it, Israelis and Palestinians. And so we started meeting with them. And once we got a sense, basically every time we met one, he was like, hey, have you met this person? And then that person would be like, hey, have you met this person? And we kind of started getting to know more and more of them. In the movie, we only show 7 different musical acts, but we met with so many different ones. I think at the end, we kind of say, look, there are so many, but they need you. Like it can't happen, nothing can happen without you. So we basically started meeting everybody and seeing who are the interesting ones that would have a really, I don't want to say interesting because they're all interesting, but who are those that have a journey that's the most relatable probably, or who are those who have a journey that we can follow for a couple of years and see, you know, how it progresses. And so we started by following probably double of what we ended up featuring and seeing how they progressed, what they did, how they collaborated with each other, and how, you know, they managed to keep on going throughout their frustrations. We didn't know if the movie was going to be in acts the way it is now. So the movie is divided by musical act, but eventually it felt like it makes the most sense, especially because you do see them recur in each other's little story. So you do kind of get a sense of how it's built. But basically that's what I can tell you about the story of the film and how it started.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, that's cool. That's fair enough. It gives us a good overview of it. So let's talk about the different artists here. Obviously, as you said, that, you know, we see different genres of music, kind of types of music here in the film, which I thought was really interesting. There's some heavy metal, like there's like kind of rap, there's folk, like there's just like a lot of vibes going on, which is really cool. Like, how did you talk a little more about choosing those specific artists? I mean, I know you said you wanted to find folks that were, you know, kind of, we could go on a journey with them, but were you also trying to have a broad spectrum of types of music? Like, what was that process like?
I think that was maybe my personal biggest surprise. I think in general, when you talk about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, people's mind go to a very dramatic, obviously, war zone visual mind space. So I think that's one thing we wanted to set out to do with this film, is to show that there's an entire world, a rich world of people that just want to live, and they want to live together, and they want to change their little piece of earth. And if change is more, then amazing. But it starts with their own lives and their own personal journey. And the second part of that was very surprising to me was the music. I'm Israeli. I know a lot of Israeli music, obviously, but I wasn't even exposed to some of the music the Israelis were making and how cool that was. And definitely didn't expect to feature an Israeli and a Palestinian heavy metal band. And I think that's super cool, very surprising. And featuring, you know, a rapper, I think that's also really cool. And he's doing so well now, and I'm so excited for him. But that's really cool to see, you know, something. It's almost like the twist of the movie is the music, but it's also like what brings it together, what makes the movie. But it's also, I think, surprising for everybody that even sees the trailer is how musical it is and how much joy there is and how rare it is to see this joy and being celebrated and connecting people in this way.
Yeah, there's this beautiful moment in the film where the Palestinian rapper and kind of the Israeli singer guitarist kind of connect at this retreat, and they like kind of hit it off just by, I think, through prayer, essentially, that the Palestinian rapper was doing, like, just during the day. And I just love that, because they started jamming off of that, and they
Yeah.
created a song, and then that song kind of became this hit, essentially, that they took around the world. Do you want to talk about, I wonder if you want to comment on that, just sort of the serendipity of some of these relationships, and just the beauty that's emerged, just bringing those people in the same, these people from different cultures and countries in the same space to sort of just find art together.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things is how these things just happened. They weren't necessarily seeking it out, right? So these two bands, they were just fans of one another. They didn't expect to be a blueprint of how we're going to live now in a tour bus forever, and that's a microcosmos of Israel and Palestine, right? And same for these two artists, the rapper and the singer, together. They were in an activist space when they met. They were in some kind of a children educational program, but they didn't seek each other out. They were, they were just there to help others. And in a sense, it helped them wake up. That's the name of their song as well. And that was so cool. And to see how when you seek out that space, it just opens you up to so many different opportunities and to hear so many different new voices that you might not have heard. And the Israeli guy talks about it very, in a very clear way. He was just like, why can't we just get along? Almost because he just didn't know, not because he was just not unaware of how difficult it can be to be an Israeli Arab or a Palestinian person living in Israel, and what it means to have your own identity taken from you, and what it means to have to live in someone else's space. So I think it's super interesting to see how once you're open to see another way and another option of living, it changes everything, and it lets you. This collaboration is one of many. After that, they started collaborating with so many other musicians. You see it kind of at the end. You start seeing all the other collabs that all of them have made, because they didn't know. And now that they do know, it opened their space, their mind space, to do so many incredible things. And they all travel so many borders in the movie,
Right.
Which is pretty incredible to see them in New York and France and Spain. And that's, I think, an amazing thing that kind of transpired in the movement.
Yeah, and I feel like there's something really powerful there around, you mentioned space, geography.
I meant Spain, but I meant space. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you mentioned Spain too,
No,
but
I know.
I think you also talked about, but Spain is Spain is also a space, so it's both. But no, just the notion of our physical space and our geography, and how defining that can be for what we become, and also what our societies become, right? Because a lot of the artists talked about, that they were, one was born in Israel, for example, one was born in Palestine. They're only like 20 minutes apart, but their lives are so different because of politics, essentially, because of history, because of tension and fear in many ways, right?
Yeah.
So like, I wonder if you could just comment on the power of sharing space, and the power that artists have to kind of transcend these, political this political turmoil, even in a conflict as fraught as this one.
I think that artists have so much power in using their platform, and I think that that's one of the things that inspire me a lot, is seeing artists, whether it's here or in Israel or in Palestine or wherever, use their voice, because you don't know who you might impact. That's why we always say representation matters, because you don't know whose pain you're helping. You don't know who you're guiding with your voice. And I think that's also a struggle, because it can be taken for granted so often. And you see it, for example, with Mila Awad, and she does talk about how she doesn't believe at some point that she can make, like, one person is not enough. And it's kind of like, I do want to make a change, but I need you. Like, you need to be, someone needs to hear my voice. And sometimes it seems it's very lonely, I guess. But
Right.
I think that's, what we set out to do with the movie is empower them and make them know. And even if it's not them, any other artist that sees this film and takes inspiration and decides to speak up about injustices, even if it's not through their music, even if it's an actor talking about being against one thing or another, or for one thing or another. And I think that the beauty of artivists, like they call it, talking about things they are for and not only what they're against, is very powerful, and rallying people through what they love and not through things that they're against, that's very powerful. And I think that being Israelis in space, in Israel, in that space, you kind of take it for granted a lot of the time. And that's what's so interesting about this, juxtaposition, this meeting of the Israeli and the Palestinian together, because you take it for granted, and it makes you think of things in a different way, be aware of the other person's struggle. And in Israel, us Israelis, we are the stronger ones, and we need to uplift and we need to be vocal in order to create change. And if we don't do it, then it's not gonna happen.
Right. Yeah, that sense of responsibility. Yeah, I mean, it was striking to hear some of the artists talk about how they feel like they're punching bags, that despite them speaking out for the things that they love through their music, through their words, through their actions, that they're still sort of targeted by the political forces around the conflict on all sides, and that they feel like they kind of can't, like we talked about earlier, kind of can't exist. So like,
they can't win.
They can't win. Like, do you think that, I mean, more broadly, do you think artists, but just artists in general, have this responsibility to speak up about issues that matter, or do you think it's a personal decision?
Look, I'm not in that position, so it's almost judgmental to say, how can you not use your voice? But at the same time, how can you not use your voice and help change? And for example, in our movie, we do have J.K. Simmons and Forrest Whitaker and Sarah Silverman and Lema Bowie, who's a Nobel Prize, a Peace Laureate. And all of these people obviously are in a much more privileged space to be able to lend their voice to a project like this. They might not, contribute in a more direct way, but that's their way of contributing, and that's something they're comfortable with. So if any artist can do one small thing to advance the discourse and raise awareness to one thing, I find it really interesting when an artist is about every single cause, because it's like, you can't be for everything. And I think that we can all relate to a cause, right? Like, at least one in life. Like, you can't be that privileged in your life that nothing relates to you. So if any person with a platform, whatever your platform is, if they can give us one cause that they want to raise awareness to, that can change so much. That can change lives, that can save lives. Even if you want to, whatever your cause is, just use your voice and do something with it. And I feel like as artists, we're so lucky in life sometimes. We're so fortunate. So, pay it forward.
Yeah, pay it forward and use what you have where you have it to have a positive impact. And that, I think, is really just a great message of this film. Because the last few questions I want to ask you, David, is just around, where this leaves us in a sense. I mean, we obviously these artists are going on and doing, like you said, they're growing their followings, they're doing great things, they're collaborating more and more, which is so amazing to see. Do you think that they're, hopefully through your film, through the work that they're doing, through the work other organizations are doing, that there's a greater, or will be a greater awareness or openness to these types of artists kind of existing and growing their platforms? Like, do you think these kind of cross-cultural, cross-ethnic collaborations artistically are on the rise, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think they are on the rise. I think there's much more openness now to artists using their voice to demonstrate what we can do, and it's all of us together. I think it's really hard to say at the same time. I really hope, I am an optimist. I do believe in good and people wanting to live together in peace, whatever, wherever it is. I think that Peter Yarrow in the movie says, like, we live in times where we're kind of in between forces who want to destroy us or free us. And he says, but that's the only time that change can happen. And I feel like every generation feels like they live in that time, right? Like we always feel like it's at the end of time. My parents, I bet, felt that, and we feel it. And that's kind of, I guess, the mood of being a human on this planet. But
right, I was going to say, there's never not a time when that is not true. Yeah,
right. So that's when change can happen. And so I really do hope that people see them and listen to them and understand them. I think understanding them, and I think we don't see stories like these often. Again, seeing, and I think there's so much humor in this movie, which is very surprising to people, to see how they live their lives in humor and how they want to create change just because of who they are and not what they represent is really strong and interesting. And so I hope people get to see it, and I hope people seek out others after they see it. And I hope it inspires them to look for other voices in those spaces. And again, whatever activist space it is, I always hope that when the two blend, art and activism, it inspires you to learn more about more things in that world, because a movie doesn't encapsulate all of it. But we can show you a little bit. We can pique your interest. We can make you learn more and understand, hopefully, more about something you didn't know much about.
Yeah, and the movie really does do that, and I hope folks will see it. And I think it's a beautiful kind of combination of the power of both storytelling and of art, through music and through so many other forms of expression, and also just a great testament to the open-mindedness of artists, I think, in general, which we don't, I think, celebrate enough, at least here in the US, and don't support enough. What is the plan with the film moving forward, David? I mean, how can folks engage with it, see it? What are your thoughts on bringing it to schools or to places where people
I would love that. We're actually working on an educational distribution plan right now, because I do think it starts like with youths, with the next generation. We kind of talk about it for like a tiny second at the end of the movie, but it's like younger people, Gen Z and the next gen, whatever it is, but influencers, kids spreading the word about their lives. That changes everything. Social media has so much bad, but the good is that there's so much more ways to relate to other people now that we didn't have before. And it's the simplicity of social media now, like a TikTok in your underwear in bed, and all of a sudden you find yourself so relatable, and you relate to someone else so much. But hopefully, yes, we will do an educational plan and bring this to schools around the US and the world. We're premiering at the Haifa Film Festival on October 13th. And hopefully some more festivals a little bit later next year. And so stay tuned, basically.
That's amazing. Well, I hope folks will check it out. It's a really powerful documentary with some incredible narrations as well, and some incredible artists. Again, it's Prophets of Change. I hope folks will see it. You can check out the Instagram page at Prophets of Change. There'll be some snippets of the film ahead of its premiere coming up, as David mentioned, the Haifa Film Festival in October. Again, David, producer of this project, it was really an honor having you on. Congratulations on the film. We're excited to see what you do next as well.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.